I mean, how do you deal with the fact that the greatest benefit of the smart grid may well be something that is not showing up in a monetary savings that is evident to the consumer? What's your thought about this?
Well, I mean, that's an issue. We do, having a price on carbon, there's no question that that would make the economics of the smart grid much more transparent and quantifiable. But I think, absent that in the U.S., because Congress hasn't done that. We do have actually most of the states in the U.S. have set renewable portfolio standards. So, but that in effect means, since most renewables are more expensive than the traditional forms of generation, is that through these standards that they've set, they're not going for the least cost energy. They're going for energy to meet certain environmental goals.
Going back to the question of how you sort of split the surplus here, there's another issue, which is of course that there are, even though there are many utilities, there are at least fewer than the number of consumers. So it may well be a huge saving to each and every utility to improve the efficiency of distribution and transmission and generation of electricity, while the savings to a single customer may be rather minor. So how do you deal with this problem that even if you distribute some of the gains to the customers, ultimately it may well be so small that it's not material for the decision?
Well, this is where I think the business model and the regulatory model is going to have to adapt to the future. In many of the smart grid investments, the entity that has to make the investment is not the one who reaps the financial reward, and so that you don't have the right incentive to make the investment. So one of the benefits that we have in having 50 different states dealing with this is that they're trying different approaches to find the right way to provide the economic incentives to do the right thing. And we do have an organization in which the state regulators get together to share best practices. So we have, you might think of us having 50 laboratories and then the ability to find the best solutions.
Isn't there a risk that some of these states would then invest themselves into something that is really suboptimal or inferior?
Well, hopefully they'll find that out
before it's too late.
By looking at the results from other states that are taking better, different and perhaps better approaches.
Matthias, if I could just comment. One, I think that your question as to, your point as to the fact that some of the savings from customers' perspectives are going to be fairly small, and is that enough to really incentivize them to participate fully in the smart grid is a very good question. Which is to say that we still haven't worked out the business model, from an average consumer's perspective of these are the gains that you're going to get from smart grid, and how much time, given those gains, and how much energy, given those gains, are you willing to invest in making sure that your energy is managed optimally. That said, I think that it would be a mistake to cabin all of the benefits of smart grid into financial remuneration from the customer's perspective. There are lots of non-financial drivers and reasons why a customer would want to participate in the smart grid. Some of this has to do with these larger global or national externalities that you were talking about that don't reside on any specific consumer but reside on the shoulders of all of us. And whether it's a public consciousness or a zeitgeist or some kind of feeling of participating in this, there are lots of other reasons that people participate in something like this in terms of managing their own energy.
Ajit?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. I'd just like to add this thing about this value, and in the sense of where is the value created in many ways for the customer or somebody else. Although smart grid is a new type of network, networks themselves are very, very old, and they behave in a very predictable way, and they basically behave by getting value to the edge of the network. So this is, you see it in telecoms, you see it in IP, and so on and so forth. Where I think this would be interesting is that obviously, so somebody who is an innovator would be kind of utilizing the smart grid to create something which none of us would see today. This is my point. The critical element to that is that you need, if I have to look at, like about 3 weeks ago, Walkman, the Sony Walkman was discontinued, yes, for after 20 years or so. The question is, today Apple is the dominant player, yes, and Apple is not hardware. Sony Walkman was just hardware. Apple is hardware plus software, Yes, so clearly the value created by these players is the mixture of intellectual property plus the physical stuff, and that is because you then have this network and these players who are creating new innovation. So I think that the whole question of value when it comes to smart grids has to be also decided with these new third-party players who are actually, should I say, software players or integrated players or something like that, or innovators or startups. You can call them by many names, but that's the value to society and to community and the grid itself. Is my
George?
Yeah, so getting back to the economic picture from a consumer's point of view, you have to look at the big picture, and consumers are going to have difficulty, grasping this because in the U.S. the asset base of our utilities is currently about $1 trillion, and over the next 20 years to replace retiring coal plants or to upgrade coal plants to become clean, or just replace them with cleaner energy, and the investments in transmission distribution, it's estimated that $2 trillion will have to be spent. Anywhere between $1.5 and $2 trillion will have to be spent. That's a huge number, especially when you consider that there's $1 trillion in assets today. So the result of this is that there's going to be upward pressure on electric rates. It's to keep the lights on. It's inevitable. And so if we don't have the smart grid, the costs to consumers are going to be increasing much more than they would otherwise. So if we had a smart grid that could shave 20% of the peak generation that's needed, as we retire coal plants, perhaps some of them don't need to be replaced, right? And the smart grid would enable that. So consumers are not going to want to hear this, but the fact is that the smart grid will result in rates going up less than they would otherwise, just in order to keep the lights on.
So essentially what you're saying is that the price per kilowatt hour may go up, but the total cost to the consumer may go down.
It's not clear that the total cost is going to go down, because the rates today are based on an asset base which is very largely depreciated. Transformers are typically about 40 years old. Coal plants are nearing the end of their lifespan, and when you're operating on rates based on fully depreciated assets, that really understates the cost.
So coming back to the question then about, are the conditions right for innovation for consumers? We know that the current system is very much built on, or the current market is very much built on the utility, and the question is, do we achieve a market situation through standardization for interoperability that is conducive to innovation and entry, so that we get innovation for consumers?
Well, I think the standards are critical, because as the cost of energy goes up, and it will go up, consumers are going to be looking for ways to help them conserve energy so that they can spend less money on the energy. And that's where innovation in terms of new applications, in terms of smarter appliances, getting rebates from the utility because they have the ability, maybe through an aggregator, to manage some of the demand on the system. These are all going to be necessary, and we'll get the best solutions if we have a competitive marketplace of suppliers who are competing with innovative applications and technologies to achieve this.
Do you think that the conditions will be there and the incentives will be there to get sufficient return on investment for entrants at it? Is it going to suffice to open up with interoperability standards, or does it take something more?
At this stage, I think there is clearly a lot of interest in the startups and people like that, especially trying to do something in this space. I think we still need some more things though before we start to see a big enough network emerge, a big enough market emerge. I mean, the bottom line is standards are ways to create a market in some shape or form, and of course we would not be here would we not have this sort of push to create this kind of thing, because the reality is that it doesn't necessarily have to happen. I mean, none of these people have to necessarily talk to each other. We could still depreciate the existing architecture, and of course, but the reality also is that you need to upgrade networks. We look at telecoms and look at the simple upgrade to LTE and the fourth generation next, and that there are other initiatives, but it is as simple like George said. I mean, if you didn't do it, you would have more cost because the traffic has gone up, and there is somehow something got to manage it, whether you do that using femtocells or some other technology, but it's all a part of network needs to get upgraded.